Hello and welcome to Journal Club Week 3, presented by myself, Christopher Gallucci. The title of today's journal article is Ethics and Community-Based Participatory Research, Perspectives from the Field. So this is the reference for the journal article that you should have read before watching this presentation. The reason I chose it was because at first glance, it seemed like an interesting article. Ethics are obviously the foundation of community-based participatory research. And I thought that would give me a better idea to help start this course. But as I'll talk about later, I didn't really feel that this article had enough information. I felt that it was kind of short, it was kind of lacking. And for that reason, I'm not too sure that it made a good journal club article. As it made, going through this outline, it made it very difficult to answer a lot of questions because some of them just don't apply. And you'll see that as we go on later on. So unlike some of the articles that we might come across in this journal club, this one doesn't have a specific health problem that the authors discuss. Even in the case study in the Beyond Sabor project, there's no specific health problem that's mentioned. The purpose of it is specifically just to talk about these ethical issues that relate to community-based participatory research and are based on increasing community involvement, ensuring that communities benefit from the research, sharing leadership roles, as well as sensitive issues regarding data collection and sharing. A little later on, the authors actually go on to discuss 6 principles that were discerned from the case study that can be used to inform future practice of ethical conduct in the CPPR studies. The authors state that with the increasing attention in health promotion and education, as well as the continuing and widening gap in health disparities, as well as other socio-political factors, that developing an ethical approach in the CPPR studies is more important than ever. They actually go on to say that the minority participation in clinical trials and epidemiological research has lagged behind the majority population, and that may be explained by the level of suspicion and mistrust among the minority communities. Beyond these issues, the authors state that there is a need for addressing issues such as increasing community involvement in the research, ensuring community benefits from the research, sharing leadership roles in the data collection with all those parties involved, as well as maintaining mutually beneficial challenges and sustaining program activities. So the aims of the study are pretty simple. The authors actually mentioned specifically in the article that they are seeking to provide a brief review of the importance of ethics in community-based participatory research. Avoiding any issue that may damage researchers' credibility, ruin trust, or give the appearance of favoritism is very important. It's also very important that researchers must act ethically because they are obliged to follow the codes of conduct that would protect communities from misuse, harm, and abuse. The authors use the Beyond Sabor project as a case study to help inform their study. Not much details about the project is given. We don't know what the purpose of the project is. We don't know the health problem involved. We just know basically the ethical principles that come out of this. We do know the location, which is the lower Rio Grande Valley in South Texas. And the author goes on to say that this area is actually one of the most economically disadvantaged area in the state. And 3 of its counties actually rank among the top 10 among the most disadvantaged in the United States. Now, the problem has to do with communication in this project. I guess some principal investigators often remain unaccountable to the community residents because of the distance of their offices, which are located hundreds of miles away. And therefore, this made them rely on local residents as temporary workers for conducting the day-to-day activities of the project. And the problem is once the temporary workers are terminated, once the data is collected, and this left community residents with very little information on the course of the study or learning about the study outcomes. To address some of the problems that we just previously talked about, the researchers in the project were actually challenged to devise ethical strategies which would allow for transparency and accountability in the development of this intervention. One of the ways they did this was through a 12-member advisory council, where they appointed community advocates, staff members of community agencies, community residents, 3 local agency directors, ministers, a nurse, physicians, as well as 4 unaffiliated community residents. All the members of this advisory council had to participate in training sessions that included discussions of what ethics meant in the field. The ethics code that was developed centered on the following 6 principles that I will discuss in the next slides: respect, fiduciary transparency, fairness, informed consent, reciprocity, and equal voice and disclosure. First principle of respect, the academic team, which is the researchers as well as the local community participants, were trained in respecting and legitimizing the voice of the participants. There was particular attention given to the training of students on extending the respect and full attention on the participants' comments. The academic team was instructed to build on comments made by study participants and community advocates and to never contradict community participants. There was also special training sessions on conflict avoidance and management. Also stressed were discussions on keeping all personal matters and possible biases separate from the task at hand. The second ethical principle is fiduciary transparency, which is pretty straightforward. Every effort was made to share the study's proposed budget with all the parties involved. At all times, the research team endeavored to maintain this high level of transparency. The third principle focused on fairness, whereas all team members were trained carefully to explain the project's inclusion and exclusion criteria. There was emphasis given to the importance of acknowledging principles of fairness when working with minority populations who in the past have not been recipients of fairness in our society. Fairness is critical to building trust among all those involved with the project. The fourth principle is informed consent, which is always voluntary, and this was made known to all the participants, especially in an area like Southern Texas where more than one language is prevalent. There needs to be made clear to all parties involved the consent and what is involved in the study, usually through the use of a translator. For those who do speak English, if a translator wasn't available, they took very special effort in speaking as clearly as possible and trying to get the points across. In general, the staff members must repeatedly emphasize the participants' rights and let them know that the participation is always voluntary and that they had the right to refuse participation at any time. The fifth principle is reciprocity, and this is the idea that all constituents are giving and receiving from the project, and therefore all the interactions are considered reciprocal. And in this manner, their time and effort must carefully be acknowledged as being especially valuable. This means acknowledging things such as their contribution in terms of travel time as well as other related expenses. The sixth principle is equal voice and disclosure. And this basically says that all participants should be accorded the same amount of time and acknowledgement, regardless of their role in the project. All ideas should be entertained. All researchers should disclose their own academic interests. Also, in terms of the disclosure, all study findings should be presented and shared with the community in ways that are understandable and respectful. And if the community participants are going to put in amount of time, they should be able to get the results of the study and know exactly what they're putting in all that time for. So the conclusions that the author came up with are just pretty generic. They state that there should be adherence by researchers and the research team to the highest ethical code of conduct from the beginning of the study to the end of the study. This is going to help reduce the potential for less than optimal outcomes and to help build trusting relationships between the research team and the community that may develop into meaningful, suitable partnerships. Now it's time for my assessment of this paper. First, I would just like to start with the strengths, which are very few and far between. It pretty much just identified that there is a strong need for ethics in community-based participatory research, which we kind of already know. I really didn't get any value from the paper. It didn't really seem that it was very original. It didn't really seem that it contributed anything new to the field, which brings me to weaknesses, which there's quite a bit. First of all, it's very short, if you notice. I think that it's lacking enough case studies. It's lacking enough examples. I think that they should have brought in many case studies, looked at principles that were used, ethical principles, and then maybe compared them across the different studies and then come up with their own list and then went into a discussion about which ones work, which ones are better, or, just give their own take on some of these ethical principles. There was no literature review. In the background section, they talked briefly about the need for ethical principles and how there's mistrust in the minority community, either based off empirical data or because of the Tuskegee incident, which I definitely don't agree in. I mean, I never even heard of the Tuskegee incident until this course, so I doubt that many people even know about that. I just thought overall they did a pretty weak job in what could have been a really good paper. Just looking at this outline, there's not really much that I could answer about it just because it was so generic. They talked about how there is a strong need for ethics and community-based participatory research, and they gave brief examples why. Then they talked about the case study, the 6 ethical principles, and gave a very short conclusion on it. And it just felt like that there should have been a lot more. As for implications for future research, I mean, that's pretty obvious. To highlight the need to train all those involved in these types of studies to have training in ethical principles to bring awareness and good practices, and that should be pretty straightforward. I think that anybody doing these types of studies should have some kind of training, not just the academic researchers, but those who they select to be in the study from the community. I think that'll give a much more cohesiveness and uniformity in the group conducting the study. I'm aware how short this presentation is, and again, there's not much I could really go off, unfortunately, with the amount of or lack of information that the authors put, which is one of the weaknesses. Answering one of these questions, do I accept the author's conclusions? And absolutely, there is an obvious need for ethical conduct in these studies, not just to prevent mistrust with the community researcher, but also to maintain researchers' reputation. I mean, that's pretty obvious. But again, the study needs to be more thorough and include more case studies. I feel like, at the end of reading this, that there's nothing really gained from it. And like I mentioned earlier, that there needs to be more of a comparison between different types of community-based participatory research studies so that we could see different ethical principles employed. We could kind of see the methods that were involved. And from there, we would be able to draw just better conclusions. Well, that's it, guys. And if you have any questions, just let me know. On the next slide, I will put up the 3 discussion questions as well as post them in the discussion board. And I look forward to hearing from you.